On May 26, 1897, a novel written by Irish author Bram Stoker was released. Dracula is the tale of a real estate agent who got in over his head, a woman facing a corrupt world, a professor who tries to understand the unexplainable, and a villain who went on to become one of, if not the, greatest villains of all time. On March 4, 1922, a film by German director FW Murnau was released. Nosferatu is the tale of a real estate agent who got in over his head, a woman facing a corrupt world, a professor who, well, to be honest, in my professional opinion, is just kind of there,
and a villain whose design went on to become iconic.
How did we get here? Rain 1922. Even though it is a massive part of our culture to this day, Dracula wasn't an immediate hit. I delved into some negative reviews from the time and found these. At times, Mr. Stoker almost succeeds in creating the sense of possibility in impossibility. At others, he merely commands an array of crude statements of incredible action. The plot is too complicated for reproduction, but it says no little for the author's powers that, in spite of its absurdity, the reader can follow the whole story with interest to the end. It is, however, an artistic mistake to fill the whole volume with horrors, and my personal favorite, I was able to finish the book. So no, it was not universally praised upon release. It was what we would now call mixed. So how has it continued on and become so huge? Media, baby.
Enter Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau.
FW Murnau was born in 1888. For those of you keeping count, that is 9 BD. Before Dracula. As a boy, he would put on plays for his family on their makeshift stage. While fighting in World War I, he was arrested, and in his POW camp, he was involved with a prisoner theater group and wrote a film script, which is absolutely wild to me. After the war, Murnau returned to Germany, where he soon established his own film studio with actor Conrad Veidt. I'll come back to Veidt on my Cabinet of Dr. Caligari video. Murnau went on to direct 12 films from 1919 to 1922, which is also absolutely wild to me. Murnau's 11th film, Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror, would go on to become the director's most famous film and one of the most famous films ever made. Enter film producers Enrico Diekmann and Albin Grau and their studio, Prana Films. Albin Grau was an interesting dude, and I would say is the main reason Nosferatu was made. Grau claimed he was inspired to shoot a vampire film by a war experience. In Grau's apocryphal tale, during the winter of 1916, a Serbian farmer told him that his father was a vampire and one of the undead. As a lifelong student of the occult and member of Fraternitas Saturni, under the magical name of Master Posidius, Grau was able to imbue Nosferatu with hermetic and mystical undertones. One example in particular was the cryptic contract that Count Orlok and Nock exchanged, which was filled in Enochian, hermetic, and alchemical symbols. Grau was also a strong influence on Orlok's verminous and emaciated look, and he also designed the film's sets, costumes, makeup, and the letter with the Enochian symbols. He also was responsible for the film's advertising campaign, creating movie posters and advertisements. Grau's visual style was also deeply influenced by work of the artist Hugo Steiner-Prock. Diekmann and Grau gave Henrik Galeen the task to write a screenplay inspired by the Dracula novel, although Prana Film had not obtained the film rights. Galeen had already worked on The Student of Prague and the screenplay for The Golem, How He Came Into the World. Also, before we continue, I want to mention that Nosferatu was technically not the first adaptation of the character Count Dracula, that being The Death of Dracula, released in 1921. That film has been lost to time, and I only found out about it while researching this video. I only brought that up just to cover my bases. In 1838, Thomas Hutter is sent to Transylvania by his employer, estate agent Herr Nock, to visit a new client, Count Orlok, that rhymes, who is planning on buying a house across from Hutter's house. While embarking on his journey, Hutter stops at an inn in which the locals are frightened by the mention of Orlok's name. Hutter rides on a coach to Orlok's castle in the Carpathian Mountain, where he is welcomed by Orlok himself. When he is eating dinner and accidentally cuts his thumb, Orlok tries to suck the blood out. Freaky ass. But his repulsed guest pulls his hand away. Hutter wakes up the morning after to find fresh punctures on his neck, which he attributes to mosquitoes. That night, Orlok signs the documents to purchase the house and notices on the table a miniature portrait of Hutter's wife, Ellen. Admiring the portrait, the Count remarks she has a lovely neck. Reading a book about vampires that he took from the inn, Hutter begins to suspect that Orlok is indeed a vampire. With no way to bar the door to his bedroom, Hutter desperately tries to hide as midnight approaches. Suddenly, the door begins to slowly open by itself, and as Orlok enters, a terrified Hutter hides under the bed covers and falls unconscious. Meanwhile, back in Wisburg, Ellen arises from her own bed and sleepwalks to the railing of her bedroom's balcony. This gets the attention of her friend Harding in the adjacent room, who calls Dr. Bulwer. Ellen shouts Hutter's names and envisions Orlok in his castle threatening her unconscious husband. The next day, Hutter explores the castle, only to retreat back into his room after he finds the coffin in which Orlok is resting dormant. Hours later, Orlok piles up coffins on a coach and climbs into the last one before it departs. Hutter rushes home after learning of this. The coffins are taken aboard a schooner, where the sailors discover rats in the coffins. All of the crewmen later die, and Orlok takes control of the vessel. When the ship arrives in Wisburg, Orlok leaves unobserved, carries one of his coffins, and moves into the house that he purchased. Many deaths in the town follow after Orlok's arrival, which the local doctors blame on an unspecified plague caused by rats from the ship. Ellen reads the book that Hutter found. It claims that a vampire can be defeated if a pure-hearted woman distracts the vampire with her beauty and offers him her blood of her own free will. She decides to sacrifice herself. Ellen opens her window to invite Orlok in and pretends to fall ill so that she can send Hutter to fetch Professor Bulwer. After he leaves, Orlok enters and drinks her blood, but the sun rises, which causes Orlok to vanish in a puff of smoke. Ellen lives just long enough to be embraced by her grief-stricken husband. The final shot of the film is Orlok's castle, destroyed. So these are the changes that they made so that they wouldn't get sued by the Stoker estate. Most obvious is the character's name. Jonathan and Mina Harker are now Thomas and Ellen Hutter. Count Dracula is now Count Orlok. Professor Van Helsing is now Dr. Bulwer. Characters Lucy Westenra, John Seward, Quincy Morris, and Arthur Holmwood are completely absent from this adaptation. Orlok does not create other vampires. He kills his victim. Murnau rewrote the last 12 pages of the script, which included the trait Orlok also must sleep by day, as sunlight would kill him. But the original Dracula is only weakened by sunlight and can openly walk in daylight. So that's the origin of that trait. Orlok's inhuman form is drastically different from Dracula. Dracula could blend into a crowd. Orlok could not. While the novel is public domain now, in the early 1900s, it was a completely different story. I will cover the lawsuit extensively in part 2, so like, subscribe and all that, Some following notes. Yes, you aren't alone if your first exposure to Nosferatu was at the end of the hash-slinging slasher episode. If you haven't seen Shadow of the Vampire, you should 1000% watch it. Keen-eyed viewers will notice that I brought up Abraham Van Helsing in this video, who served as the inspiration for Gabriel Van Helsing from the 2004 cinematic objective masterpiece that is Van Helsing, portrayed by Hugh Jackman.